So, hello, this is the group Post-Mortem review for the team The Martians on their game Tactics and Tentacles. Just going to start off by introducing the team. So, if Lead Elliot, you want to take over?
Hi, I'm Elliot. I was the team lead, and I did programming, 3D models, and texturing.
Other Elliot?
I'm Other Elliot. I was a group artist, so I work primarily on 3D models, 2D art, texturing, some stuff in Substance Designer.
And Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh Glover, and I did programming and 3D modeling for this project.
Cool. So I'm going to pass it immediately over to Lead Elliot, and I would like you to provide a brief synopsis of your game.
Yeah, so Tactics and Tentacles is a typically stealth game where you play as a Martian from Mars who must collect resources to survive the night when the British Redcoats come and take over the little town that they live in. It's primarily like a stealth sort of game where the player has to sort of move around, find different things to help them escape the level.
Cool. How would you define the art style of the game?
It's very simple, like very flat colors, cel-shaded, like stylized, quite cartoony, more of a sort of a less realistic approach to the art style.
Cool. And how would you potentially, as a team, sort of say you've embedded the theme of the Synoptic project within the game?
More of, rather than being a physical journey, more of like a mental sort of move from like A to B, still having a sort of movement, but less of a larger movement and more of just trying to find a path out, as well as also focusing on the pressure of the situation from being chased by redcoats and gathering resources with a restricted time.
So there's like a serious, like darker undertone of the theme, sort of overlapping a more child-friendly, younger audience-friendly visual style of the game, is what you're saying. Cool. And if you had to describe the main features or mechanics of the game, what would they be?
I think this is the main features. We've got I think the movement system, sprinting and going invisible, are quite a standout part of the game, as well as the sort of the AI and how they move around to really sort of set the environment, especially with the redcoats and how they follow like a uniform patrol layout.
Cool. And is from a player's perspective, what's sort of a defining feature of the game? What's something that's iconic that you can do? So you collect all these items and you collect all these pieces, and you ultimately use them, and for what purpose?
For crafting the items, I think we've got quite a good system of finding items to then craft into more essential items to aid the player. Cool.
So we've got this sort of stealth-based game with almost survival game features implemented as well, which is great. Cool. So flicking back to the start of Synoptic, we're going to start off just by jumping back to the role application process. From an individual perspective, were each of you happy with the role that you landed on?
I'd say I was happy with the role that I had, yeah.
Can you elaborate as to why?
I think if there's one thing that's become really clear, especially towards the end of first year, it was sort of, I enjoyed a lot of level design, more than a lot of things, being able to like put things in place and sort of building a layout for the player to explore, I think is something I've really grown fond of.
Cool. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I was really happy with the role I got, because programming is really hard to be subjective in. You know when it's right, compared to some other roles which can be very subjective. Like art, you you can't get it wrong in some ways. However, I would get it wrong, so I prefer programming because it's very clear when it's right.
So you like to take that methodical approach and build on things from a foundation upwards.
Yeah.
Cool. Elliot Walker?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just an artist for fun anyway, so it kind of just felt like something I naturally enjoy doing, but I get to do it as a role in a team. Just creating things and expressing myself in that kind of way, it's just entertaining to me. So
Cool. So obviously, with being a smaller team, you all had your main roles as a priority, and obviously, based on those responses, we all enjoyed and wanted those roles. But given the nature of being a smaller team compared to other groups, did you find yourselves dabbling in other disciplines?
Yeah, we've all moved about in different areas. We've all taken a chunk of the different roles, which I think is very useful. You know, it really helps other people have the different ideas, different ways to approach things than just one person. And we spent a lot of time working out ways to make sure we were consistent with designs and looks, especially through the use of a smart material and substance, and as well as keeping models as a relatively low poly models, so that we didn't sort of have these big, crazy, over-the-top high poly models in the game instead.
Cool. What about the other two guys? Josh, let's go with you first.
Yeah, I definitely did. 'Cause I ended up having to do like 3D modeling quite a bit.
And was this something that you expected, or did you have any sort of struggles with this, or was it something that you were happy to explore?
I kind of expected, and I was very happy to explore because I enjoyed the bits of 3D modeling I did do, even if it wasn't many. Like, I really enjoyed the TV model I made. It's actually one of my favorite assets I've ever made. And I was really happy to be able to explore different avenues of game development.
So it's good to see some growth in there as well, because obviously being from a programming background, you normally are quite juxtaposed to the responsibilities of anything from the creative and art side, from the developer dynamic. But it's nice to sort of see that you've taken both aspects of it on board and had a positive experience. What about you, Elliot Walker?
yeah, so for me, I think the very major emphasis was definitely on the artwork. I think just because we had to create everything from the ground up, so it's a lot of assets to do. But also, like, I definitely messed around a little bit with sort of more on the ideation side of things. I think I didn't really do anything in engine myself, but like sort of helping around with level design and world design and making sure all that kind of flows with how I expect things to look and like the vision I have for the art style, or like helping idea with mechanics or reviewing how they look in game and stuff to make sure that kind of all flows and fits together.
Cool. So with having like major individual responsibilities, how or what has kept you guys sort of together and made sure that you guys have stayed on track with your aspirations and obviously your proposal and your intentions with your project?
I think, to put it really simply, I think this is a really fun project, and just how sort of silly and cartoony the actual design and the project can be, I think has been a big driving force as to why we want to keep adding stuff to this. Being able to do these little things, look at these little aliens and be like, this is quite funny, has really helped us stay on track with what we want to do and making sure we keep building on top of what we already have.
What about the other two guys? Is there anything that you think from a team perspective has sort of helped you stay on track and stay on the same page?
Definitely the documentation Elliot did.
You go, Josh.
Like, definitely the documentation Elliot did. Elliot Williams, teamly, sorry. And we also spoke quite frequently as well. Like, we were very sure on what we were doing next when we were doing stuff, especially when we were like ideating.
Elliot?
Yeah, I think there was a very cohesive kind of vibe. We were all on the same page. Like, very much, it was almost from the first day, like, we knew exactly what we wanted to be and how we wanted it to look and feel. and it was very fun and distinct and unique, and so it was entertaining to work on that as a group. And you kept having these things that you would come up with ideas and be like, oh, that's cool, or that's funny, and that's silly, and you just naturally wanted to build on it because you enjoyed it. Like, to second what Elliot was saying, like the Martians are such silly little dudes, so it was funny coming up with like stupid animations for them, or stupid little costumes, or just little things you could make them do. And it made the project fun to work on.
Cool. So outside of like identifying like fun and fun being a major factor to help you guys drive forward with the project and stay positive and enthusiastic with developing it, how important do you feel communication was?
I think it was hugely important. Knowing what we were all working on through the meetings was a big help. It definitely gave us sort of a direction we at least wanted to get to during the day. And usually I found I'd give myself one task and it'd branch into finding 5 other tasks to then complete alongside what I was doing. And I think as well, just communicating what we were doing, and then it sort of helped us come up with more ideas. So when we started working on the market at the start of beta, we communicated all these ideas and made a list, and it typically led to us coming up with more ideas together.
Other guys, anything more to contribute toward that?
Nothing in particular.
Twice. Just let's go with Josh first.
Nothing in particular. But Elliot, go. I believe in you.
Right. Yeah, obviously there was a lot of very frequent communication. Like, I think, especially like even outside of lesson time and stuff. Me and Elliot were like hanging out on breaks and stuff. So that meant a lot of the time when we were just like eating, just talking, just in general conversation, something would just come to mind, and then it was like something that you could add on to the game. And I agree 100% in that you'd have one idea, and then that branches out into like all these different little things, but then those things branch out into different things, and it leads into just it's very iterative, and you're just adding a lot all the time, and it leads to this whole thing.
Cool. So moving forward from your role application sort of into your group pitch and sort of floating around the pre-production phase, which is obviously fairly iterative in itself. How did you guys sort of get together? How did you guys manage yourselves? How did you form the basis of what your group pitch became after initially having those individual ideas?
Day one, we sort of looked at each other's ideas for what we had done for our solo pitches, and then we basically just compared them and was like, this is a good idea, we'll move on with this one. And then adapting an idea we already had meant we'd get in time because we don't have to come up with a whole new one. But then we also had 2 extra people added onto the idea, so we could actually come up with more unique ideas and really get each other's sort of personal touches to really touch on the idea we originally had. And when we started moving into pre-production, we focused on the GDD first, which I think was the best thing to do because we could get everything we knew we wanted to include as a basis just underlined straight away. And then everything else, art style, what we wanted to actually include, we could do at a later date because we actually knew what we wanted to spend time working on.
Cool. So that's sort of indicating obviously the planning and design of the whole idea. How did the visual sort of style start to develop itself within that pre-production stage? This might be more of a question for Elliot, given that Elliot had a primary art role.
Yeah, I'll let him answer that one.
Yeah, well, I think for me, like, art was, well, obviously the artist, art was a big focus. I think we looked at like the other people's like projects in the past, and one thing I always noticed that really stood out to me, and like in my experience just playing games on my own and stuff, is that like the visuals are a huge part of that language and what attaches you to it. And a lot of these older projects don't really have as much of a focus on that. So I immediately thought in my head, like, I want to get across some kind of idea that's a very unique and gripping visual style that's simple enough for us to get across, but it's also like unique and it's not something you've never seen before. So it was sort of just mixing concepts of what we had talked about already. Like I think Elliot had straight away been like, oh, well, I want to do something sci-fi, and I had like the whole detective thing, which was already had like a very sort of distinct visual idea, and so we kind of just discussed different forms of sci-fi and like more unique ways to take that direction rather than just like the more general like modern look that you would associate with it. So thinking about different ways that could influence the way it looked, which sort of initially led to us all piling on ideas, and it's where you get to this huge influence with like Mars Attacks and like retro sci-fi, because it's just something you don't see a ton and it's very distinct. And then sort of as it progressed, it kind of just all compounded with everybody chipping in ideas and the way they felt about it.
So where did all of this sort of iteration and experimentation and try to land on a key style like occur?
It was sort of the conversation about the art style happened pretty early on. I think like on that first day that we talked about it, we had at least the general aesthetic kind of talked about. Like it was almost pretty much nailed from the get go, because it was a big point of like we want this to feel compelling and unique.
Yeah. So if the GDD was where obviously all the design, the planning from the design perspective came from, where did the visual experimentation and iteration come from? Or where was that stored?
The art Bible. We put together a big art Bible with lots of concept art and like mood boards and stuff.
Lovely. Josh, from your perspective, because again, with me sort of being in the background, I always saw the Elliots communicating a lot and having lots of in-depth conversations about ideas and directions that the game could travel. Do you think, from your perspective, that there's anything major that could have been changed for the better from an earlier point of view in production? Or planning, rather?
Not really, to be honest. The game visually and design-wise was both like really good, and I really liked them. So I can't really think of how it really could be changed, to be honest. It's kind of like we had the idea almost immediately. It was fated.
Okay. With all the pre-production documents that you guys created, do you find that it came in useful later down the line?
I think they were definitely more of a help towards the start of the project. We definitely relied on them quite a bit for knowing what we wanted to do and what we need to get done. But as we sort of moved down the line towards the end of the project, we've not necessarily abandoned them, but we haven't focused on what was detailed in them. A lot of the stuff that was detailed in them has still got done, but we just found new ideas and better things to include that we felt were more essential. I mean, we've spent the past 2 weeks improving on what we already had, which I think was better than trying to implement a whole new method to follow or new items to find, and just really upgrading the overall experience and enjoyment you can get with the game.
So, based on the vertical slice you were aiming to produce, you sort of felt like from the get-go you'd planned everything that was needed and required, and implemented everything that was needed and required, and just sort of felt more of a polish was necessary.
Yeah. The start was just sort of outlining the essentials, and as in the document you can see the essentials at the start, like in the asset list, and as you sort of get down, it gets a bit more specific, and not a lot of them specifics are in the game. Whereas when we did the playtest with some of the first years, we got a lot of feedback on like objectives and moving around and the map and stuff, and that was all areas we focused on improving in the past 2 weeks to just make that experience better.
Great. So moving forward from pre-production and into those production stages, which obviously were the largest bulk of the project with alpha, beta, and gold, or final production. from a team lead perspective, Elliot, how have you kept a lid on things? How have you kept a handle on the team, and how have you sort of monitored progress?
We've had our meeting log, which we kept up to date, not every day, but enough to sort of be able to know what people were working on. A lot of it that we were working on became more of a verbal discussion. Like we could start the day with a meeting log, but then by the afternoon we've talked about something else and we've moved to something else and didn't get put in the meeting log. Because we were focusing on a lot throughout a day. One of the things that I realized quite not recently, but a couple of weeks ago, was I outlined this timeline of events for pre-production, and I was basically giving like one thing its own specific day. When we've been doing this, we've been doing what was like 3 days in one whole day. So I think I'm glad that we've been able to sort of fit a lot more into one day than just being like, okay, we're just going to focus on this one thing for the whole day. We've had the flexibility to make sure more can be done within a day, which then has given us a bit more time to work on little fun references and little details that we find more entertaining.
So would you say that you've maybe from initial planning sort of used or followed a waterfall methodology where like you want to tick one thing off at a time before moving on to the next, and sort of transitioned into more of an agile workflow where, you know, people are splitting off into their own disciplines and completing tasks separate from one another simultaneously to cover more ground and be more effective?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say we definitely sort of moved on quite a lot. I mean, there was times where I'd be getting messages from Elliot, and he sent me another model and more textures to put in, and that was all on him. It was never anything we sort of planned. It would show up, and then I just put it in into the game, rather than it being something that we had an actual time allocated to doing that.
Did you guys make use of any sort of Trello board or external asset list or something that helped you keep track of, you know, what things were complete or what new tasks were sort of in the pipeline or being prioritized more than others?
We did have a Trello and an Excel sheet for assets. As I mentioned, as production sort of went on, we've like neglected them. They've been sort of left in the dark, and haven't really been touched a great deal. But they did get quite a bit of use towards the start of the project and keeping us on track with what we wanted to accomplish.
Cool. Did you ever find that any of the production stages you've been through were sort of you'd split up that whole period of time into smaller chunks and maybe split the workload with different like targets to focus on?
We definitely had sort of like times where it would be like, you're going to focus on this, I'm going to focus on this, you're going to focus on this. And I think we definitely kept with sort of having our own individual like things going on for each other. We haven't sort of been like, let's work as a group on something. We have for sounds. Sounds has been something we've worked quite close together to make sure they're right. Whereas when one of us has been programming or one of us has been modeling, it's usually just been one of us will have a look at it and be like, yeah, that looks great. And it's never been like two people have been watching someone make a model and then we've both been like, actually, no, we would like it to be like this. We've all just we've all focused on our own areas and grown from there.
Cool. So, did you ever make use of like sprints throughout the project?
We would document what we were working on. We never really mentioned much about things we were continuing to work on. I mean, for me, if I was to start working on something, I'd want to see it to the end and make sure it was done so I knew I could tick it off. And we never, like I said, we never really were like, we've started this. And then when we come to the meeting the next day, we never really mentioned that we were continuing on with something.
Okay, that's completely fine. So we'll just get a bit of a contribution from everyone in the team. Within Alpha production, what were your main contributions?
My main contributions.
Yeah, well, go through everyone one at a time. We'll go Elliot, then Josh, then other Elliot.
Okay. My main contributions in alpha. I did spend a lot of time working on the level layout in alpha, and a couple more of like the scenic models, as well as also a lot on the UI, and a lot of that sort of changed as I got models and other things to sort of advance the design and the level as a whole.
Cool. What about you, Josh?
I was mainly programming whenever it worked. It wasn't very frequent, but that was some of my major contributions, just programming or helping Elliot fix a random bug that he found, that kind of stuff.
So programming through code or programming through blueprints to develop systems and things?
Blueprints, Unreal coding is not fun.
Cool. Elliot, what about you?
Yeah, my goal through alpha was kind of just to get the most basic import models out and a couple of like blockouts and stuff. I think the character models were a big one just because I've never done that before. And with a big project like this, working on more complex 3D stuff was very new to me. So it was kind of just get the character models out of the way, get the most basic, useful stuff that we need there and done, and then see where we go from there.
So prioritized, obviously, arguably the harder but more important features of the game or assets within the game. Cool. From a team perspective, if anyone has any input, given the state of the alpha, the iteration of the game, do you feel like there was anything major missing, or any, was the vision, was it true to the vision in the proposal?
I think there was definitely, you could see sort of the vision forming in alpha more than actually see the clear vision. With alpha, we still had like basic lighting. We did have like the sand down, but when you looked around the level, the houses were white boxes, the walls were white, everything was like blank. But we did have like the player and the red coats, which helped understand what we were going for. But overall, when you look at the sort of end product now, you definitely, you can see A vision, but you can't see V vision.
Okay, what about the other two guys? Josh?
I think in alpha the game felt very empty. It was probably because it was still in development, obviously, but like in like the daytime mode, the game was very, very empty, which was, we wanted a more vibrant kind of thing going on, and it was very clearly not happening.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm sort of sharing that sentiment as well. The daytime sort of felt a little bit too long, and the game loop didn't feel fully finished or obvious to the player, which obviously I know has changed over time given the state of the end project. But yeah, I think there was maybe a lack of detail or consideration put into the nighttime for wanting the daytime sort of aspect and part of the game to feel more complete. If any of you disagree with that, that's completely fine. But I feel like there was more priority into getting that daytime sort of setting complete first before sort of replicating the same thing in reverse for the nighttime mode when the game becomes a bit more chaotic. Elliot, what about yourself? Do you feel like the alpha product was kind of where you guys wanted it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. Like, I think the whole thing with nighttime versus daytime, like the night stuff didn't really get worked on for a very long time because it was difficult with the whole concept being the daytime kind of needed to be done before we could start doing the nighttime stuff, because the night is obviously, it's the same location but completely different. So we needed everything that was going to be there finalized and done in the daytime mode before we could really alter it and make it like run down and like all destroyed and stuff for the nighttime. So it definitely meant that the night was very neglected for a long time. And I also think that like, yeah, the daytime, the vision from the beginning was to have like a lot of stuff going on, like you've got people walking around and like all this stuff. But in alpha, it definitely was very barren. Like a lot of that stuff that we wanted there just wasn't done yet. And it was kind of a big thing of like we need to make this film more lived in.
I think you could argue from the feedback from players who were testing during that stage as well, there was sort of a lack of direction to aid the player. You'd created this sort of, I wouldn't say a large scale open world, but you'd created sort of a somewhat large environment for people to traverse with any sort of meaning or direction. Elliot, you want to chime in there?
I definitely agree with that. When I watched, when it was second years who looked at our project at that point, and watching them play through it was such a hard thing because I'm sat there and I'm wanting to tell them you just need to do this, but all they're doing is walking around the day and it's all just empty white stuff, and they're picking up coin boxes, but they've got no idea what any of it means. And one of them stumbling across the night phase and still having no idea what's going on. So I think it was definitely it was such an empty game to go through, and we definitely took that on board through beta and gold, really enhancing just the overall experience and understanding of how to play the actual game.
Good. That leads us on to sort of the next portion of questioning, which is moving into beta. How do you feel the project developed? Did it develop positively? Did it rely on feedback to aid development? What sort of significant changes stood out by the end of beta?
It developed like substantially. I mean, we have packages from alpha all the way up to now, and just going back to the very first one and then comparing it to like 2 versions later, the start of beta, it's incredible the sort of scale it goes up by. Although there was still issues along with what we had towards like the end of February with beta, it was such an improvement on the visuals. We had the houses, we had the walls. Locations of like the market and the cantina weren't like fleshed out as much as they are now, but there was definitely more of a push to really get the whole idea across. And when we started working on objectives and like the compass system and everything, it really did just help improve on the feedback of what are we doing, how are we doing it, where am I, what's going on. And I think through beta you really see kind of a focus on the design, but also a focus on the experience that the player goes through throughout the whole game.
Great. Other Elliot, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, it was this big thing. I remember specifically like the market and the nighttime. We had these like periods where we went through, and you had this just huge push where it was this massive thing where we were all like, "What about this thing? What about that thing?" And we just threw stuff together and made it like way more developed, and it added a lot to that project, and also sort of taking away a lot of like the blank space and filling it in with stuff. It was all based on very much of just watching people play the game, hearing what they had said about it, and just mechanics add a bit more of a direction to where you're going, and like I said, yeah, just making everything feel more alive and like there's actually stuff going on around you. And the juxtaposition of like the daytime versus the nighttime and like how different that is, it was just a huge thing. Just trying to make it all feel exactly how we imagined it.
Josh, from your perspective, what were the sort of bigger, significant, more impactful changes through from alpha through to beta?
I think aside from the visual aesthetics of the game getting massively like improved, mechanically the game was getting more and more clear as Ellie put in like a marking system so players know what to do. You can now figure out how to get to places, how to do endings. I think the AI became better as well. Overall, the game became much less of like a drag to play and much more of a, oh, I see what's the rules of this game. I see what you're meant to do now a bit more. But that's one of the main things that happened. Like 90% of the game came together, it felt like, during beta.
Good. So we had like a bit more of a complete experience established by beta, which was good. So leading through into gold standard, which is obviously kind of where we're a little bit more or less at the end of gold standard now. So the project is about to sort of have a pin put in it and be called complete, quote unquote. But with gold standard being that shorter production period, that small little period of time where you're not so much focusing on adding anything major, you're more so focusing on tweaking and adjusting the content that you've got. What sort of key things stood out during these final few weeks?
The before that we had the playtest with the first years, like I mentioned before, and it was the same with Alpha to Beta. Just watching them and seeing how they approach things and how they found the game, I think helped build a foundation of what we needed to focus on. Like I said, the objectives was something we completely redesigned to let the player actually know they were there, and a bit more like polished to work with the overall game. As well as bringing back the marker system to actually work properly and aid the objective system a lot better, as well as focusing on smaller things that just give more of an option. We recently worked on putting in the ability to go into first person, which was something we never had planned, and it really does add it. Like, it makes the game feel a whole lot different. And when I've been playing it myself, I've been going through first person. There was a moment where I was being chased by a redcoat, and I turn around and I'm in first person, and you look him dead in the eyes, and it's like terrifying. There's this whole other, there's like this fear factor brought into it with first person, but you don't get that with third person, because you can see so much more with third person. But in first person, you're on the same level as the alien, and he can only see what's in front of him. And I think first person definitely adds this sort of fresh feel and fresh take on top of the game.
Yeah, such a small change can have such a large impact, right? So this is something that we should always toy with. Arguably, you can see the value in toying with this like almost genre and perspective element of any game, to see how effective or detrimental that can be to an experience. And you could even argue this addition of first person format actually hits home harder with the theme that's supposed to be embedded within the brief, within the project, and sort of tells a bit more of that sort of traumatic, fearsome side of being a refugee, or being under attack, or like fear of being a refugee, or fear of being captured. Sort of, it translates that emotion a bit more clearly, which obviously is a bit of a bump in the road, arguably, because you're so used to and attached to this charm that you've developed of this third person aesthetic with this character who, this loving character you've put so much attention to detail and like personality into, to sort of taking that away just by simply changing a camera. But again, it sort of raises that question internally within the team: is it a worthwhile trade-off? And that's a conversation worth having. Just in terms of, do we ship this? Do we make this sort of huge change to our initial intentions of the project being third person, to pull it into first person, because this is such a potentially effective and positive change? So Josh, other Elliot, what do you guys sort of think about that camera perspective?
I think at times it can genuinely be scary enough where I worry that it might actually slightly affect the Peggy rating. But besides, I do really like it because it brings you much closer to the Martian, and it really emphasizes like the change in the world, especially.
Fantastic, yeah, definitely, especially with the audience stuff as well. Again, a small change like that can affect more than one thing. Obviously, I've said something there, but considering your audience as well, by introducing that element of fear and surprise and scariness, could obviously alienate a certain portion of the audience you want to showcase and deliver this project to. Elliot, thoughts on the first person, third person camera?
Yeah, so I think my internet slipped down a little bit. So the first person functionality is really interesting. I think we still have the third person stuff there. It's an optional thing, like switch between the two, and I think it adds a whole level of customizability to the game. Like I think that's something that hasn't been talked about a ton. Like a lot of games you played in, it's like one specific way, but having the ability to switch between two different ways to play a game adds kind of a fresh angle to it. And I also think that the first person was it was interesting as like a different sort of way to view things through. Like you're used to seeing this game in like one specific way, and it's just cool to like see through the lens of the character for once. I think it adds quite a bit. That's cool.
That's a very powerful comment, I think, in terms of seeing through the lens of the Martian. It really puts you in the shoes of that person, and when you've got such a darker, serious theme that you sort of, or message that you try to like spread within the project, again, it's having more success in that area. So it's definitely worthwhile considering that before, obviously, calling the project quits and finalising things by the end date. And that's a conversation for you guys to have as a team, sort of last minute. But moving forward and towards the back end of this meeting and this review, looking at this as a huge experience, a learning experience, because it's been a lengthy project. What's the biggest lesson that you guys have taken away from it? Start with Elliot, then we've got Josh, and then other Elliot.
I think there's a lot to be taken away from the project. I think definitely, like, the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of the project. I don't think there was ever a time where we didn't, give so much effort and then we never felt afterwards that we were unrewarded for it. This feeling of completing something finally after hours and hours of time trying to make it to work is such a rewarding feeling in the end. I think as well, still getting the understanding that as much as you want to put so much into the game, just taking it slowly and focusing on smaller things and just getting a basic like layout done. Like Alpha was so basic, but getting them core areas just done was better than just being like, okay, we've started 50 different things, but we're not going to get all of them done. We're only going to get 5 of them done. Just pacing ourselves as we did, I think really helped us make the project as good as it is.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a great response. So sort of taking on that notion of slow and steady, and it makes you think and relate back to actual real life industry projects as well, which take huge amounts of time and years to develop something from the ground up, with that same principle. Josh?
Aside from like learning how to program better, I think one major thing I learned was to learn more about the tools you're using alongside a project. Like for me, a major roadblock for my progress was GitHub because I couldn't use it right for some reason. We kept coming into problems with it, and it wasn't even like what I knew what was stopping me. It was what I knew of something else that was also equally important that I really just didn't even think about. That I didn't think would stop me as much as it did. So then
Sorry, you continue.
Like learning about other tools that you will use alongside game development was definitely something I should have learned more.
Yeah, so definitely this sort of comes into that almost that pre-production phase of planning and sort of mapping out not just what you're going to make, but what you need to be able to make what you want to make. But it also ties into planning and scheduling and how real world events and unpredictable instances can occur and have a detrimental effect on your schedule ultimately. So not being able to use GitHub has been a huge barricade. Whether or not you overcame it and sort of got around to it is not necessarily irrelevant, but it's eaten up time that could have been better spent elsewhere. So planning ahead from an earlier perspective and getting to grips with the idea, the content, the tools, the methodology, the platform, the audience, having all that information at hand and before you commit to something is definitely something that can help mitigate unpredictable events and make them more navigable when they do inevitably occur. Elliot, what's your thoughts with biggest lesson you've taken away from this project? Mr. Walker. I think you're
sorry, Martin, that was freaking out. I think the huge thing that I felt like from the beginning I hadn't really messed with really like a ton, and being forced into this position of like, it's like you just gotta make this now, and not really knowing how to do that properly, it kind of forced me to learn very, very quickly, and I think my 3D skills improved massively because of that. And I think the big thing overall, like across the entire project, was that like I think a lot of instances where something didn't feel right, like in the game, it was oftentimes like really little things that you would tweak just visually, and it would make a huge difference. Like, you know, just the thing of like the Martians like looking slightly different, like just like having color variations. It adds a lot of variety to what's going on around you. Or like the sound made a huge difference, I think, and like the volume and mixing of certain things, and like it's a lot of the time it's these really subtle kind of things, not these like giant changes. It's like little things that tweak sort of together to make a huge difference that you won't even really subconsciously think about.
Yeah, definitely a valid opinion. It definitely highlights as well the importance of not saying no to something just because you don't know how to do it. Sort of, it takes on that responsibility and that accountability that you guys have to onboard within your own roles, within your own disciplines, to continue learning something, to be able to do something, and sort of knowing whether or not that's then going to be feasible. So bringing things to a close, do any of you sort of think there was any point in the project where the team started to crack and fall apart, or were we united from day one and stand strong still at the back end of the project?
I think we've had a majority more of a positive sort of run throughout the whole project. There's been moments where personally I feel we could have been better, but there's definitely that's greatly outweighed by the days where we accomplished so much and we collaborated so well that we managed to make something we've wanted for the game work, and it just enhances it so much. There were a couple of times where I felt like communication wasn't the greatest, but it never got in the way of us actually creating something amazing in the end.
Josh, your thoughts?
I think it was decent as it could get. I think I could have done a lot better communicating, especially. There was a time where I forgot to mention it earlier that I just basically stopped working on the model because I mostly forgot about it, which I feel like was just a really, really bad time for me to stop communicating at all. And I really should have worked on that, and I've tried to do better at it now.
Good little lessons that we learn, from personal experiences. Definitely, it's good to be able to have that self-awareness to pinpoint, where we've excelled and where we've fallen short, because that leads to growth. And Elliot, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole project felt very consistent in the level we were working on it at. I don't think there was a particular moment that I really sat and thought like, oh, this feels really bad right now. It didn't really feel like the morale, like the communication that we were having really took a hit. I think towards the end of the project, like the last sort of week or so, we felt a little bit more like we've done everything we want to with it, and it's a lot of like just polish that is less necessary. And I think that how do I phrase it? There's less of a desire to work on it right now than there has been throughout the entire thing. But I don't think it's like a major caveat. Like I think, we're at a point where the game's pretty much done, and like that's sort of naturally going to happen. I think throughout the entire development, it was pretty sort of just go. Like we were all kind of just on it.
Cool. And then sort of last question, maybe one of the last questions, we'll see. Depends on responses. Are you happy with the end product, or are you upset, or are you proud? How do you feel about what you've accomplished?
I'm super proud with what we've accomplished. It's like strange when we started doing this. I definitely had sort of like, we all make up our own versions of what we think the end result's going to be, and I think that image that I generated at the start in my mind is definitely there in the project we have today. I'm so proud of what we've all accomplished on all this. We've all developed individually so well that I myself am proud of what I've done and what all of us have sort of done as a team. We've really pushed the boundaries of what we all probably thought we were capable of. And even though there are so many things I'd 100% do differently, I'm not upset that they're how they are. I think the project is brilliant as it is.
Great. Yeah, great input. Josh?
I'm really happy with how the game turned out in pretty much every single sense. The game works beautifully, and it definitely also looks really good. I'm happy with my own contributions, although I wish I obviously did far more than I did. But that's pretty much how I feel about it.
Good. And other Elliot?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool because when we started, like, none of us really had like a super concrete skill set in what we were doing. Like, you know, I only really had like 2D art capability, like super nailed down in it, and I think that, like, you know, Elliot knew what he was doing with Unreal, but it wasn't like that complex as opposed to like the type of stuff he was doing towards the end of this project. And I think, you know, the same goes with Josh and his programming, and like we've all developed like pretty majorly in over the course of it. I think it's cool looking at like some of the earlier assets, some of the earlier things we were working on, towards like comparing that to like stuff we worked on towards the end of the project and how much better some of that stuff looks. And I think, yeah, like Elliot was saying, like, we all very much had a specific kind of view of the game in our head. I think it's cool because the finalized project feels very much so like a blend of all of those images that we all had in our minds, rather than like one specific person's version of the game. And I think that's really cool. I'm very proud of it. We've never really done anything like this before, like worked on a project like that. So it's just cool to see it kind of like come to completion and have like that thing, and I can be like, I made that.
Great. Lovely stuff. And then if I'll open the floor a little bit, if there's anything that any of you guys sort of want to question either me or each other on, now is an opportunity. Just do a little raised hand if that's the case. If not, we are more or less done, and I can round things off. No? Cool. Right, so this last few... So I was going to say weeks, but we've got days until the project is absolutely, I want to say, dead and buried. And we've got a really solid project, and we've got a little left to do. Ultimately, you guys need to sort of get together sort of one last time for a final sprint and a final push towards planning, recording, developing and sort of editing that final vertical slice that you wish to present. And again, lean into your specialisms or unexplored areas of sound and recording and editing, if that's something that you've not really been used to. Because ultimately, you've got a really wicked game and a really good opportunity to show it in a really good light, with sort of cinematic effects, with cut scenes potentially, with wicked transitions and whatever else it might be, to really sort of sell this world and sell and tell a little bit of this story and narrative that you've placed into this cool project. Before we put a pin in it and call it done, you guys have maintained a really good work ethic throughout the project from a client perspective. You guys have sort of again pushed the boundaries with what can be done at this level and how much can be done at this level if people approach things with the right attitude. And it's been really wonderful to see it from our side of things, because there's never been any complaints. There's never been anything we've had to worry about, because you guys have done such a good job from start to finish. So like I say, pull together, communicate, round things off quite nicely, and finalise that project. With that being said, this is your group Post-Mortem complete.